Falcon Napier. Welcome to Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to continue our discussion about the integration of the Enneagram into our work as tension managers, which may or may not involve a change grid. So that should be mysterious for some of you. Before we start the recording, Brian was sharing with us a document that he discovered, and I'll just pass it back to him and he can recap and pick up where he left off. So Brian, take it away.
Yeah, so this documents the neuroscientific process of motivation. So it does a good job of explaining these how motivation is processed in the brain. I was thinking about that when I was writing my notes after our last call, because Chris talked about the dynamic nature of motivation. Mm-hmm. And so the number 5 in me said, yeah, we probably need to look at that. So it breaks up motivation in terms of 3 sub-processes that have sub-process underneath them. So in terms of generating motivation, a process of maintaining motivation, and a process of regulating motivation. And so each one of those have different parts of the brain. So like the ventral striatum is the reward center. The orbital frontal cortex is the valuation center. So those are important in terms of sustaining motivation.
Very good.
So, and then the anterior cingulate cortex is the attentional faculties, and then the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is cognitive control. So those are important for regulating motivation.
Yeah, let me stop you for just a second. So everyone knows, I've resent the PDF file that Brian's making reference to because he's talking about a diagram or something. I want to open this up and see if I can put it up on screen. So Brian, we're in this article. This is it, the behavioral level. Is this what you're?
Right. In fact, it talks about it in the very beginning in the abstract. It like breaks it down from, the basic levels of it. So what I was thinking, just based on this and understanding motivation, it seems like, or at least that's the question that I posed to myself and my journal was, is it reasonable to think that the Enneagram provides us with great content in terms of, historical analyses and the pathologies that we bring to a moment, right? So these habits and those kinds of things, but these processes that are described that are in the motivation process, they bring together kind of this junction of subcortical processes. So like these things that happen automatically, like if we see something, a number 5 sees some information that I like, my orbital frontal cortex get lit up because it's of interest, right?
Got your attention, yep.
So that raises my level of attention, and it brings, if I continue with that, then I'm using the ACC, the anterior cingulate cortex, because now I'm engaged in some cognitive things and trying to figure out where does it fit, what do I want to know.
So is that then like the gateway to the rabbit hole?
Right, exactly. So those intentional faculties, this anterior cingulate cortex and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, those are the things that get adults in trouble.
Oh, okay.
Because we get to add stuff that is not there. So if you look at learning, the difference between kids learning and adults learning, kids just do, they learn by doing, where adults want to know and then do.
Okay, all right.
Because these faculties, the ACC and the other, they don't grow in youth until you're like 25. So that's what separates the teenagers when they say, you ask them, why did you do what you just did? And they say, I don't know. They
right.
don't
And
know.
so and then if I'm looking at this diagram here, I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit for everybody. Oh, wait, it's jumping around. Make it stop. Oh, back, stop. Oh, what's happening, man? All right. It looks like that I'm starting at the base, the neural level, where these things are going on, which are going to then give rise to the psychological level, which are then going to manifest in the behavioral level.
Exactly.
So these are causing the red, which will then lead to the green.
Right. And that's that top up, bottom up, top down communication in the brain. So you have these subcortical processes that send signals up the brain stem.
And then I imagine it's also a two-way street, because then obviously something has to be initially triggering whatever the soup is that made this neural activity even happen, right? It's not happening for no reason. It's something prompted it. And if that, prompts something that gives feedback that it's correct or that it's wrong, I'm going to imagine the neurochemical soup is going to change too.
Right. And see, these form the two of these pathways together form what's called a dopaminergic pathway. So in other words, it's looking for the reward. And this is where, again, context becomes important, I think, for the Enneagram, because we want clarity. We understand what people want to do, like the question that you asked in the last session, right? What does their life look like? Or what do you want it to look like? If you're not clear with that, then the reward can't be clear in terms of what you want or working towards and sustaining that motivation. It's too easy to wane when it's not clear,
All right.
as opposed to when it's clear.
And see, again, I've not read this article. Maybe what we should do is just set this aside and then say, let's make sure everyone has this, they can read it over, and then we can kind of talk about it, for a whole session very soon. Because here's the thing that I'm noticing just by looking at this diagram, and again, I've not read the what do you call it? The research paper. Haven't read it, but I do know this. I'm looking at very specific lines that say that some sort of activity occurring in the amygdala and the whatever striatum is, those are the things that are going to lead to pleasure. And pleasure is going to impact frequency, duration, effort. I mean,
Absolutely.
but if it's something where I'm going to say my psychological appreciation for the value of something is going to come from whatever the heck OFC is and this ACC thing. Where if it's ACC and DLPFC happening, it's going to give rise to a goal.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah. See, these are, so because remember, again, in terms of dopamine, the dopamine prediction era reward says that even the anticipation of something that you anticipate, you can emit the same amount of dopamine as if you actually engage in the activity.
Right. Yep. The brain doesn't really know the difference between something that's real and something that's vividly imagined. And so it's there. But, I'm just looking at this and I find this diagram very fascinating. In fact, worthy of a screenshot. Because I'm very curious, does choice lead to value? Does value dictate choice? I would imagine value dictates choice. Value regulation. Yeah, I got to spend time looking at this, but I definitely think it seems like it's something that'd be worth talking about. And then I like this idea here about the generation of motivation, the maintenance, and the regulation.
Right.
So it's saying these are what's really in your brain driving that. And so Denise just joined the call. So Denise, we're trying to see if this article that Brian discovered can help us understand some of the underlying neuropsychology behind the Enneagram. Are you aware of any other work that's been done around that, Denise?
I am not, but I want this. I'd love to see the article. I'll read it.
Oh yeah, I've chatted it over already twice, but I'm going to do it again now that we got everybody, but it'll be in the chat window in half of a jiffy. You guys do need to click on the download link underneath it. So it's such a big file. It's not going to automatically, unless you do that little click to download part. Yeah, at least that's how it's working on mine. Okay, anyway, so Brian, shall we set this aside and do a deeper dive?
Sure.
Finish with our little, because today, I just want to do a little walkthrough how we could actually integrate the Enneagram into the change grid into the Enneagram, and any variation between those two things you can imagine.
Right.
So, pardon me, terribly sorry. So I put together a little just quick word outline. I don't think that this is something that merits sending over to any of you, but if you guys want it, I don't, happy to do it. Anyway. So I said, well, it's really more about integrating psychometric tools. While we've been talking about the Enneagram recently, I would also tell you that I don't know that this would change if we were talking about someone who is using DISC or someone who is using Myers-Briggs or anything like that. So right now the Enneagram is our focus as far as psychometric tools go, but I think this would apply to the integration of any psychometric tool that anyone may choose to employ. So with that, I'm going to believe that because we said that the change grid was never really intended to compete against any psychometric tool, it was designed to live in harmony with all psychometric tools, past, present, and yet to be. So we pick up where they leave off. And so at the end of every psychometric experience, the question is going to come up, now what? So great, I understand myself better. I understand everybody else better. This has all been terrifically eye-opening and fascinating and all those things that we would hope it would be. But if this is going to be part of my personal development plan, then there's some work to do. Well, what is that work? So what are those activities? What's next? And that's going to translate into a list of perhaps behavioral changes that people want to make or goals they want to set, efforts they want to put forward. It's all going to be dictated by whatever their results were and the ways in which they might like to develop themselves further. And so I think that with that, it all feels very much like, well, heck, I got to start with the current situation. So the current situation is, and now I'm saying to them, okay, well, now what? And that might actually be the question that I asked someone. So let's see. Who wants to? Well, I'll do a quick walkthrough, and then we can kind of play with it a little bit if you guys want. Otherwise, Brian, I was about to use you as the guinea pig. So, there's got to be something to talk about. That's my whole point here. We will talk a little bit later about when the psychometric tool is the focus of the work that's being done. And then we'd like to bring the change grid into play, as opposed to what I'm saying here. The psychometric tool is already done. And for whatever reasons, we are now just walking the path with them. Or this could just be an independent thing. How often do we meet with a client and have no knowledge whatsoever of any psychometric experiences they may have had up to that point, or which one they might prefer? We don't know. So it's all going to start with a little bit of a path walk. I've got to say, so what's up? What's going on? What's happening? What do you want to talk about? I don't want to make this a basic training session about the specific questions that you should ask during each one of these, but we got to get the ball rolling. And so that's what we want to be doing at this point in time. Now, how could I use a psychometric tool at that current situation level here? Now, I mean, obviously, for me to use it, I have to know which one they've done. But I could use my knowledge of their psychometric result, their type or whatever, by perhaps asking deeper questions about the current situation from that type's perspective. Or I could even say, well, for a moment, imagine yourself looking at this situation from the vantage point of another type. Now, hopefully it's another type inside of the same model they learned, because as they learned or had their psychometric experience, I'm sure that there was at least a mention made of what the possible types may include. And so I could certainly use my knowledge of that psychometric tool they're using, even if I'm just asking for them to give me some info about their current situation. Right? Can you guys see that? Is that a good way to use it?
Yeah, what would you focus on, T? Would you focus on what results they're currently achieving, or what?
No, because if I'm going to be using the psychometric tool integration, that being my intention, I want to make sure that I am being very conscious that my questions
Hi,
don't
Mr.
steer
Stigran. How
them.
are you?
Good. How are you? It's chagrin, but that's fine. Either way,
Just 1 second.
the answer either way.
Oh, there we go. So what I want to make sure I don't do is prejudice their responses. So if I start asking them, like, what goals are you working on right now? Well, even as a 5, I would be saying goals. Those are very interesting things, you know, because that's not where I might be at that particular point. Denise, what would you like to add to that?
In using the Enneagram though, when you know what their goal is, if you want to go look at different perspectives, always ask them questions on the high side of another type, as opposed to the more
Mhm.
dysfunctional, unhealthy side.
Yeah, only the brightest top.
Yeah. So if I was to ask you questions about observing through the eyes of an 8, I would say, so how can you be involved in directing the blah, blah, blah? So I
Okay,
would go to use the
let-
talents and strengths at the high
Right,
side.
let me just interrupt you there for just a second, Denise, because what you've just described is absolutely a way to use it, but you've jumped down to solutions.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. Or even the goal definition. This is just when it comes to someone telling us what is happening right now. What's going on? It's just the current situation, and that can be the current situation in kind of like what do I say, quantifiable, observable sorts of things. But it could also be how they happen to be feeling about what's going on, because your feelings are part of your current situation. Even if I'm asking them something historical, that data is part of their current situation. It's their current memories. It's their current what do I say, values they've placed on something to even bother remembering it or sharing it. So again, I think that you can use any psychometric tool, even at that earliest stage of doing things. But can you hear that integrating that is going to add time to the discussion? And
Mhm.
generally, the clients I work with are not coming to me with a level of tension that is sufficiently downgraded that they're happy to just mellow out and go into the current situation in grand detail. Usually they've got more tension about a particular situation, whether it's a problem they're trying to solve, which is very far up grid, or it's some opportunity they want to explore. So that's more like power stress or whatever. Or they've just got a task they're trying to take care of, which is more of a power kind of a thing. I don't really know that my client would feel like they were getting their money's worth if I did a thorough application of any kind of typology as I try to extract, explore, understand the current situation. Do you guys agree with me on that? Or all I'm saying is you want to
Yes.
be aware of it and sensitive to it.
I totally agree. I think it adds complication. It adds an analytical complexity that most people don't have patience for.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
that I wouldn't have patience for it, and I have an interest in this stuff. So,
Exactly.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think the key is to get somebody as connected and willing to be as honest with you as possible about who they are and what their situation is. And the minute you move it to a typology or an analytical exercise, they go into their heads.
Yep.
And start defending something around that.
That's
Or
right. Well,
so I don't lead with any kind of instrument when I work. I just don't ever do that because I think it just moves away from who that person really is.
yeah, well, and I think that's the same thing. That's why for me, it's like I don't even pull out a change grid right away. I just want to walk the path, and the path is just a kind of a little bit of structure to a regular old purposeful conversation. And so this is what I do, and sometimes it doesn't really lead towards the need to do much of anything other than just have the conversation.
And do you think, T, that sometimes too, when you're that overwhelmed with competing priorities and you're experiencing, this significant amount of tension, that I find it difficult to even articulate. Like when I'm on these calls and I'm trying to articulate what I see as possibilities as a 5 and an INFJ, about healthcare and how we can change the systems from a systems perspective. Now, mind you, I'm bringing, having lived in all these different countries and growing up seeing different systems and the impact, the economic impact. And I don't know how to articulate all of that. Like, it's very difficult for me to do it in a way that people get it.
Right. Yeah. And, I think this is it. We're just talking about the need to be sensitive to why we're asking whatever it is we're asking, how much are we going to do? And that's why for me, it all starts with what brings you here today. What's happening? How's life? I got to be as wide open as I can possibly be, because I know that what governs everything moving forward is paying attention to tension. And I don't know where they're paying their attention to, but they'll tell me really fast if I just open the door. And so I'll just say, so what's happening? What they may do right then and there. All I said was, what's happening? They could jump into telling me about a horrible problem that they face, a big obstacle they've encountered. They might be really excited and talk about some goal they have, some desired situation they want. They might be telling me about some struggle they're having, trying to follow through on some sort of a solution. I don't know what they're going to say. What they're going to say, though, is going to tell me a great deal about their level of productive tension, first and foremost. Obviously, they're giving me at least elements of the content of what's really going on. I'm understanding the context of what this discussion is really all about. And so I guess what I'm saying is that you ask a question to get things going, and now the burden is on your shoulders to simply observe with your ears, so that you can kind of start to notice whatever is happening with their tension, and also what are they revealing about themselves. Because when you ask perhaps a 1 to describe their current situation, I believe that though a 1 is going to want to be far more precise in what they're telling me than perhaps a 4 might be, or a 7 might be, where they're really more about the experience of doing something. I mean, I believe that if personality typing is real, and I do believe that it is, I have what I'm going to say, I won't say that. In normal life, I don't really stop myself from displaying my personality as it is, unless I have some reason to want to abbreviate what I'm saying or modify my behavior for whatever reason that's going on. If you're meeting the genuine me, well, I'm revealing to you what my personality is with every word I say, every gesture I make. It's all telling you that. Our burden at this current situation step is to really become very observant about what's going on with their attention and what are they disclosing about themselves. You guys, thoughts about that? Does that resonate with you guys? And by the way, while it's true that we can do it more deliberately, I believe that every human being automatically does it. So we're always reading people. That can't just be a 5 thing. I have to believe that part of our survival instinct is to constantly be sizing up, or, otherwise you're going to get killed off. You got to be careful.
Yeah.
Thoughts about that?
I think we're losing some capacity to do it, however, because we're just not, I think the attention's being hijacked, I guess is where I'm going with
this
that.
is it. We live in a world where we are bombarded with messages all day, every day, from every source you can think of. Finding a quiet space in one's mind, this whole pursuit of the oracle of the self sort of thing, or any kind of center of the change grid, detached experience. It's really all about counteracting what you've just described. We're bombarded, just bombarded. So anywho, this is all about observing. That's what it's all about. Now you get into the discussion about the desired situation. So what do you want? What do you hope to do? What's the goal? I don't know. I'm just going to open it up nice and wide and say, so what do you want? How do you want it to, I don't know what they're going to say, but I'll bet you everything they're going to say is going to fall into the category of something they hope to gain, something they hope to lose, something they don't want to gain, something they don't want to lose. As they answer that question, they're going to automatically start filling in some information. Now, are they going to give me information that meets with every one of these? No, because people pay attention to where their tension is. And so if their tension is about what they're suddenly losing, or they want to get rid of in this particular case, then okay, that's what they're going to share. Now I can come back after I've allowed them to do their spontaneous kind of share. I can come back and certainly seek more detail about whatever it is that they've already shared. Or if they didn't talk about some of these other things, I can say, well, let's flesh this out. Let's expand this. What do you hope to gain? What do you not want to lose? You know, whatever it is they didn't talk about, I can go in there and ask a question or two to see what's going on. Now, again, this little scenario is that the psychometric experience has actually preceded the change grid. This individual has already filled out a psychometric tool. Now, you may already know that, you may not know that. So it may very well be that completely in your conversation, even up through desired situation, you may have no knowledge whatsoever of what psychometric experiences they've had, right? Right. Okay. But if you do know, well, then maybe right there, this is a good time for you to pull in the awareness that they gained about themselves, about their own motivations, etc., to make sure that those are factored into the exploration of their desired situation. I think that's a really good thing to do. And obviously in the Enneagrams, there's 9 different core motivations and an infinite number of varieties. But nevertheless, there's going to be certain things that type is going to be more aware of and interested in than another type may be. And so that means that as much as I want to know what this person really wants, I may also want to ask them what what am I saying? Explore the blind spots a little bit and say, well, let's talk about your area for growth, which is whatever type it happens to be, and say, what might you want to gain or work on in terms of that? Or if we're looking at where people go in stress and they're having some of these behaviors that come out when they're under stress that they now want to stop doing or whatever, maybe I can bring that into the discussion about whatever their goals are. Otherwise, I don't know the point of understanding where my growth areas are if I'm not going to pursue something or apply that to whatever situation I find myself in. And if the truth is I'm being sucked into the darkest depths of whatever my stress type happens to be, there's work to be done. And that's
Can we play with that for a minute?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I have a call like right after this call. And again, I'm charged with this mission of trying to articulate to these healthcare executives, and some of them are CEOs, MDs, many of them are CEOs, MBAs. And so the languaging is different.
Yep.
The incentives are different in terms of what I'm talking about in terms of changes. So in terms of what you just described, like what's a strength for a number 5 and where could a number 5 get hung up?
Well, I can give you my beginner's insight, but Denise.
Yeah, Denise, our guru.
Oh, Denise, you're currently the resident expert, whether you thought you were going to be pulled into that role or not.
Yes, that's not the name that I would call myself.
Well, let's just say then comparatively speaking, I don't know. I think it's you and Kathy have the greatest amount of experience using Enneagram. So there you are. Okay, anywho, yeah, what were we asking her?
So what would be a strength of a number 5 in that kind of like articulating this grand vision for possible change in healthcare systems and some of the key stakeholders, i.e. mainly patients and the clinician. So what would be a strength to help facilitate that? And what would be, I hate to say weakness, but something that could trip up?
Yeah, well, those are going to be obstacles. So say the weakness thing till we get to obstacles. So what does each type desire? And are some types more, you think, more likely to focus on gaining, while others might be more interested in getting rid of something? Not gaining, not losing? Are there sufficient differences in the way that each type would frame the desired situation? Denise, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so a 5 actually loves all the details. So you're gonna probably come with a lot of information. But the real truth is we've got to get information from them. So
Yep.
your strength is the value you put on the information, the details and whatnot. But the challenge will be to incorporate other people
Mhm.
to make sure that there's a combination of all of the other experiences or perspectives that also are important for the information that you have. So it's there's
Interesting.
That's
the
the 5
beauty.
social kind of thing. Yeah.
And so you're coming probably with lots of good information, but you want to know where they are and how much information do they have, how much information do they need to get from you,
Right.
what's valuable for you to share with them.
Yeah.
And see, what's interesting about what you just described is I did that based on, they say, hey, this is the information we want, like beforehand. So it's almost like when I'm a judge for these health tech innovation companies, startups, right? And so the other judges always require a business plan, but then they don't take the requisite time to actually read it. So it seems like these people are asking for this requisite info or this information, but they don't give the requisite time to read it. So then when I get into the meeting and I'm explaining those details, then I feel like, you know, they didn't even give it the time. So
Yeah.
then where do I go from there? It's because that's where my tension starts to raise, like, okay, what if you read the information, you would not necessarily be asking the questions in the way that you're asking.
And so what did you just learn? They didn't read the material.
Exactly.
How would you interact with an audience when you know they didn't read the material?
I tried to teach them again, but so, you know, the meeting still has to go
Right.
on. And so I just keep
right,
going.
can you do that without feeling frustration?
I don't think I'm good at that.
Exactly. That's a 5.
I'm just being honest. I'm
No, it's
really
true.
not
We don't
good
like
at
dumb
that.
people. We like really smart people, and we don't like dumb people. And so it's like, you know, it's like even when I've been hired to teach this material. I mean, lots and lots and lots and lots of times. So you guys know how long I've been doing all this. I can tell you that it wasn't very many years into the career that I very much felt as I was being introduced. In my head, I'm going, oh my God, I have to recite all of this all over again. It's like, people, read a book, listen to a tape. Why do I have to say this all over again? So,
You know, and that's the beauty of the Enneagram, is that we learn so much about ourselves, but we also have this compassion for ourselves that we've got so many, we'll call issues.
yeah.
And if we can see ourselves like that, like as a 5, you know, you have to have all this information. But then you look at other people and say to yourself, you know, there's different than me. They're not like me, and they've got their own issues. But how do we use my issues and their issues and bring everybody together and
Exactly.
understand them?
Exactly,
Mm.
exactly. And so let me for a moment go more generic on this. And so, because Brian, what you were actually asking was not so much you doing a walk along your path, as much as it's understanding the walk that another person you're trying to influence is taking.
Absolutely.
Where are they at? And so let's say that this was a sales strategy meeting, and we were all trying to figure out the most effective way for us to land this gigantic client. I can certainly say, well, in preparation, let's think about who are the players in this decision. Okay, well, there's a C-suite person, and there's an engineer, and there's an outside consultant that's all involved. Well, why don't we, as an exercise, work our way through how each of them might answer the desired situation questions? What do they hope to gain? What do they hope to lose, not gain, not lose? What can I do to develop a better understanding of where each of those people are coming from, so that I can see where their merits are, what's motivating them for going on, whatever the source is of whatever their resistance is, what they're valuing, what needs to be included, how they like to receive information. I want the answers to all of those things. And if I can do it while in an interview kind of a situation, that's all fine. If I can do it in advance, giving people a questionnaire, that's really fun. That's really great. Well, let's take that exact same concept and say, if it's true that all these different roles are going to look at the situation in a different sort of a way, it has to also be true that each of the 9 Enneagram types, or the 8 different social styles types, or the 16 different Myers-Briggs types are also going to answer these things in at least a somewhat predictable shape, a predictable way. And so if I'm working with someone who has reasonable fluency in the tool, whatever the tool happens to be, I could certainly say to them, let's say my client is actually a 5. I can say, okay, for just a moment, let's put yourself into the role of an 8. And say, and I'm doing that because of the development area, or the growth area is for cultivating some of the brightest capabilities of the 8. I might say, how might an 8 be answering these questions? What do you think the 8 energy that's inside of you and inside of everyone might want to be gaining, might want to get rid of, might not want to gain, what might not, what they might not want to lose? In order for them to do that effectively, they would have to have a far greater level of understanding of each of those types than any of us happen to know. And certainly, I think that that's a big ask for any individual who has gone through any psychometric tool, because I know the only parts of it they cared to read were the parts that described who? Themselves. And so maybe they gave some passing interest if they figured out who their, spouse happens to be, or their boss or whatever. But ultimately, we don't expect someone who has been experiencing a psychometric tool at the consumer level, if you will, with enough awareness of the other types in order to really make any grand contribution to their greater understanding of the scope of the desired situation. So what I want to do, I think, in integrating a psychometric tool during desired situation is to make sure that I understand enough about the type they think they are to make sure that they touch on each one of these as they would in that type. Yeah.
That's good. I think that's quite helpful for me. Like the call is about, I'm certified in healthcare and clinical informatics. And so from an informatician perspective, the key is always about the stakeholders. And so when we're trying to bring clinicians and patient experience together to where they both experience some value out of it, oftentimes these systems aren't designed with the patient in mind, because I ask the question all the time, why do patients have to go through all these processes before they even see the physician? And then I'm concerned with what happens after, right? And so getting them to see the patient's perspective and me getting to see their perspective kind of brings this common ground to everything. I think at least it would do. So
I definitely think it will.
Okay.
And you guys have already started talking a little bit about the obstacle part as well, because that's where people's attention is definitely going to go. They know what they want. They also know they're not there yet. So they have to have some idea that they're being stopped, even if they haven't described what's interfering with their forward movement. So maybe they know some of the obstacles. Maybe they just know there are obstacles, but haven't identified any whatsoever. Maybe they've done a deep dive and can rattle off a massive list of all of these, and they've got flow charts about how they're going to go about attacking each one of them. At least now they've moved into solutions, obviously, but at a certain point in time, we need to get into this obstacle thing. So again, I'm saying this person has had a psychometric experience. They know at least a great deal about themselves. Well, hopefully some of the things they learned about themselves were the ways in which they're in their own way. And maybe we could say that there are practical obstacles that have to be overcome, because in order to do whatever, maybe they need money, maybe they need some material, some tool of some sort, some whatever. So there are practical aspects of obstacles, things we need to have in place. But we said that, remember, if I go back to the path of self-discovery, when we get to the black step, we say, why aren't you where you want to be? It's because there is some obstacle or set of obstacles, real or imagined, that are in your way. And until you can identify each one of these obstacles and deal with them appropriately, the chances of you reaching your goal are what? And people, will say unlikely, or whatever the case may be. So I do think that we can certainly get to this point and just say, based on what you know about you already, beyond the practical obstacles we've identified, what are the obstacles of personality, or the obstacles of that as gloriously perfect as you are things that you tend to not be aware of, not be able to do, not really want to do, or not really a good match for who you are. So can you guys kind of feel like I could pull whatever awareness they've gained about themselves into their identification for those obstacles that are beyond the practical?
Yeah, that's probably a quite important step, actually.
Yeah.
In terms of sustaining anything, you have to know, you will want to understand that, or you're just going to recycle the same kind of
I mean, you
stuff.
want to ask yourself the question, or even ask them specifically, depending on what kind of type they might be. But you say, how many people have got, goals that they have failed to meet, where the truth is they had all the practical elements covered, but they didn't follow through and do what needed to be done. Well, why didn't they follow through and do what needed to be done? We know it's because there was a tension management issue, but at the heart of that tension is there's some element of awareness, ability, willingness, or suitability that's we haven't really unearthed, explored, whatever the case may be. I just know they're not moving forward.
And T, I think it's important to point out, as you always do, that that's where true motivation comes from the obstacles.
Yeah, because, and by the way, even a goal, no, I just have to say this, whether the source of the tension is something profoundly negative or something profoundly positive, the question still arises: what are you going to encounter? What do you need to deal with? Whether it's what can be done to help you get to your goal even faster, or what is in the way of you protecting yourself or minimizing whatever the negative impacts are of this situation. I still got to figure out what's in the way of me having, feeling, doing, being whatever it is I want to have, do, be, or feel. So what's in the way of that? And so sometimes it's obstacles in my path of something glorious, and sometimes it's obstacles that are in my path of something maybe necessary, because there's plenty of things we all have to do that we don't necessarily want to do, not particularly willing to do it, but nevertheless, we understand, yeah, we got to do it. So the way the world works. Well, is that an obstacle that's practical, or might that more likely be an obstacle of the mind? Because I'm not motivated to do it. I know I'm babbling, but you guys getting where I'm going is like, maybe sometimes whatever we're working on requires us to be moved up grid in order to do it. Outside demands, deadlines, things like that have to be put front and center in order to hit a threshold of activation. And maybe other times, no, it's about having them take a trip inside, where they do become a little bit more passionate about something, motivated is the word we've been using in recent conversations. Lack of motivation is an obstacle, unwillingness. Okay, thoughts about, again, I can plug it in there based on their self-awareness of whatever their obstacles are. And if they do have a little bit of an understanding of other obstacles they aren't seeing, maybe I just suggest to them that from my vantage point as a whatever I happen to be, I think there are some things that I would be unaware of, or unable to do, or unwilling, or unsuitable. Do you resonate with any of those? Or maybe I want to share with them some common challenges that other types face, just to see if they've got some resonance with it. So I can certainly incorporate that map of humanity or that overall collection of types into how I help, what do we say, add some depth and breadth to the obstacle identification.
Mhm.
Thoughts about that, anybody?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. You know, T, I'm an ID and a really low C, and so details get by me.
Mhm.
And you know, I have to really be cautious, especially when it comes to a client. But that would be, you know, a major awareness of mine that would move me forward.
Yep. And how many of you also know that there are sometimes each type has obstacles that it's totally even unaware of exists, because they don't see it as being a problem because it's just who they are. They don't even, they don't know there's another way. And so it is unawareness, but it's kind of obliviousness to what's
Mhm.
really going on. They're kind of going like, how do I not know that I had that obstacle? You know?
Mhm.
And the
So,
hardest thing is to work with somebody who has been successful in their careers or their roles or whatever. And they say to themselves, I am who I am and it's been successful. So just tell me what I need to do differently because I've already been successful. So what you said earlier about the inside awareness is they have to have a lot of tension in order to be willing to do something different because they've had so much history in being
yeah,
successful in what
they're downgrade about it. They've got a comfortable way of going things, of doing things. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
The other thing that came up, it just as you were saying that, it just went through, flew right through my head. I'll come back to it. And it was really somewhat interesting. Okay. So this idea about obstacle identification, the only thing I want to caution you on is that you are doing this and simultaneously something is happening with the person's level of productive tension. So what do you think happens as you move from a discussion of the current situation, the desired situation, to tension should ideally go what direction?
Up.
Up. And as I move from the desired situation to obstacle identification, where's it going?
Up.
Upper. And so I have to recognize that I want to make sure that there is enough tension to get them to see their situation as valuable enough, problematic enough, etc., these obstacles to be enough of an issue that they're willing to not only develop solutions, but hopefully follow through and do something with those. So there has to be enough tension to get them to even want to bother doing this part. At the same time, what do I not want to do as I'm doing the obstacle identification?
Or you don't want to go too high.
I don't want to move them up into stress, because what happens if I move them up into stress?
Rationality disappears.
That's right. They're going to become very reactive and they're going to be pulled out of their cognitive, way of dealing with the situation, moving more into their, where would they be going to? Limbic system, and maybe even some of the amygdala stuff might be coming in. I don't want to trigger that.
No.
That's not good tension management. That's too much. So we want to just be aware enough of what's going on here that I get the information that needs to be done so that I can say, all right, well, what would you, how are you feeling about this? What do you want to do about this? Is that enough? Is that plenty? But in all likelihood, if I've done a good job of tension management, I don't need to probe for that. I think if I ask a question about, well, what about other obstacles? They go like, isn't that enough? What are they telling me about their tension?
They're there. They're
They're there.
ready.
They're at the threshold. I think I've identified enough, don't you think? What
And
are we
maybe
going to do
that's
about
the,
this?
for me, maybe that's the 5 nemesis, to Denise's point, what she was describing, because I definitely, I can geek out on details.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm giving too much, that's how we were trained in medical school, right? It's like you drinking information from Niagara Falls, and that's,
I know.
so,
Yep.
so
Well,
maybe I need to
and
break it down.
yeah, and I think Denise can tell us that there's other types that are also kind of like information hounds, collectors of stuff for really no apparent reason. But I can tell you, like, This is no joke. I've developed over 300 hours worth of programming I can be presenting, but I know that 99% of the income I've received over the course of my lifetime has been based on 20 hours or less of it. So what's
Mm.
the, you know, what was the point of developing 280 extra hours worth of stuff? So that's, I think, one of the problems with the five. We go into deep detail with no real concern about how practical it might all be. Denise, am I, who else is interested in data?
Well, the five is definitely the king and queen of that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
one is interested in data, but just speaking from experience, too much of an action orientation to have a lot of patience with it after.
Right, yeah.
right.
You know, you get to a
Mm.
point where enough is enough. And, you know, so how many people really want to do a deep dive into any subject matter once it's met whatever their practical need was for learning whatever it is they needed to learn? You know, not everyone wants to become a lifetime student of a particular subject. And hopefully all of you've got something that you like to think yourself as being a lifetime student of whatever it happens to be. So,
Mhm.
And
Yep.
as a five, don't you want to know how much information that they want to get from you, like, and where and how much and what value that would be for them? Because you don't really want to spend your time doing something that you don't have to do. You want to go directly to the point. So I'm just curious, how important is it
well,
up front?
let me ask you this question. In order for me to want to go to the level you've talked about, am I likely to do that if I'm an SP? Or is that like more of an SO? I don't, those aren't the developmental levels. What are those called? The instinctive drives or something?
The levels of integration, you mean?
No. I mean, when we say like there's going to be for each type, there's there's a social, a sexual, and a self-preservation.
Right.
Yeah. And so when I'm thinking about the people who want to keep going deeper and deeper, wait, is that what we're talking about? Wanting to know more and more, are sharing the detail of it. I know that the SP types are not particularly sharing oriented. Am I
Yeah,
right?
see, I think I am sharing oriented because I take
That
my
would make
time.
you
You see, I think,
social or the one that's more one-on-one.
yeah, because I spend a lot of time in it to making sure, like when I'm asking what information is needed, I think that's where my levels of attention get ties because I felt like, I don't do anything just to get it done. Like there's a level of quality. So there is that perfectionist in me
Yeah.
when I put work into it. So when someone don't give the requisite time to actually read what I prepared, that my tension goes way up. And I'm just like, okay, what was this about?
Yeah.
This is the information you asked for. I just put quality of time in it. And I'm not giving you necessarily more than you asked for, but I spent quality time in it to make sure that, the I's are dotted, T's are crossed in terms of understanding. Because
Yeah.
I remember Nelson Mandela used to always say, when you speak a language everyone understands, it goes to their head. However, when you learn to speak their language, it goes to their heart.
Right.
And so that's what I'm always after. And when people don't spend requisite time in it, I can like go from 0 to 60 in a nanosecond.
The thing that occurs to me as I'm listening to you talk as a five, Brian, and maybe T as well, but particularly what you're describing is the need for a five, and this is just my conjecture. I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this, but the greater need for the five than others to really connect face as much as possible with
Yeah,
whoever it is your client is or your cohort is, and get a real feel for that individual, approach them from your heart, because there would be a tendency to, information is head, information is all head, and I know people need, you need to understand more who they are,
right.
and be able to ask the kinds of questions before you start preparing things for them. Because I understand that I've done exactly what you've described and gotten frustrated, but what I learned over the years was that I just didn't get to know them well enough to figure out what they really needed and wanted.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what matters, because the information.
It doesn't matter. It's what I call technically correct and totally useless. You know,
Excellent.
if you know, I mean,
Exactly.
Wives love that sort of thing.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, what does the, I mean, I really had to learn this in a corporation, you know, when my clients were all executives, the top executives of the business, it's like, I had to learn how to create one-page documents for everything that I did.
Right.
And if I couldn't figure out how to do that, they didn't want to talk to me.
Yeah.
And I had to learn how to do it extremely effectively. So, you know, it's know who your client is, know who your listener is, find out, you know, it goes beyond what do you need to know. It also goes to what format do you want it in, and how long do you want it?
Yeah. Oh, hang on just 1 second. Just needed to, I heard Linda. All right. Yeah, I think this is a really, really interesting thing about having the knowledge of it. The question is, when would you want to pull in their awareness of their type into your discussion? And so I can certainly see how early on I'm using my observational powers more than anything else, because they're revealing to me at the current situation a lot about their type that I will then know. If I understand the tool they've used, I'll know whether that's resonating or not resonating, and that'll all be great. And I can certainly see how I could pull it into the desired situation to great benefit. And I can certainly see how I could pull it in obstacles to great benefit. But I'm feeling the benefit increasing as I work my way down the path. And so when I get beyond the obstacles, I get into the solutions. Obviously, if the obstacle is unaware, unable, unwilling, unsuitable, then the solution is to make them aware, able, willing, and suitable. And so I can certainly see how I could now very much pull in their awareness of their type and say, how are you going to go about addressing each one of these things, and see what they can do with that. Obviously, if they're struggling with one of them, it may be because that happens to be a less bright area of their overall personality. So maybe it needs to be educated a bit. Maybe it needs to be exercised a bit. Maybe they need to be aware of it at the very beginning of it. But I can certainly see how I can work within my knowledge of their type, and I can help them work with themselves in their own awareness of their type to be able to help them to do this. So, yeah, but I think I can also, again, depending on what their breadth of knowledge is on the other types as well, maybe I could say, rather than say to them, well, you know, talking to you as a 5 or talking to you as a 1 or talking to you as a 7, here's what I think the solutions would be. See, that to me is part of the challenge, you know, the whole too many cooks spoil the broth kind of a thing. I had to make sure that not only are these solutions of, you know, a viable way for them to get to wherever they're going, I'd like to be as efficient about that as possible, because too many choices are not necessarily a good thing. And so while I might like them to understand, particularly if they're working in a team sort of a setting, like if the officers and the C-suite are having issues with each other, maybe it's because the solutions that each of their types are naturally bringing forward for them, they are having conflict about which solution to use or how to go about doing it. So I can certainly see how I could use this as not so much as a team building, but as more of a peer awareness kind of a thing around the specific subject that's going on with them as well. But I can see how knowing their type and them knowing their type and a little bit about other types could be extremely valuable at the solutions development stage. Do you guys agree with me on that?
Yes.
Yeah. Denise, any thoughts you want to throw in? I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, completely. Because, and when doing team workshops with people, they learn a little bit about each of the types, but in the end, we ask them, what are you willing to do for your own type? And as you look at your teammates, what are you willing to do to work differently with their type?
Exactly, exactly. And it may very well be that at this solution stage, depending on the size of the group, we may be able to identify that certain tasks that are involved in pursuing whatever the course happens to be would be better assigned to a different individual based on whatever we know about their personality and they know about their personality. So maybe this whole idea about suitability could be addressed by better understanding specific task assignments to members of a team. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I can see how I can use it extensively here, but I'd like to finish. I know we're a minute over, but I'd like to say that the very last step of the path is about predictions and commitments. I believe that each one of those types is going to have its own version of the prediction that's going to happen and its own version of commitment. Well, I'd like to make sure that we explore those with that person, because not everybody is great with commitments. And not a lot of people are great about making predictions that are accurate. You know, some people are doomsday believers that everything's going to go wrong, and others see everything like it's got its own bright little shiny cloud. You know what I mean? It's like these things are what I want to say, colored by our personality. And I know that if a one hears someone makes a commitment, the one believes that that commitment is going to be followed through on come hell or high water. And they're going to assume that everyone else's commitment is that intense. And Denise, is that going to be a good match or a not so good assumption to be made?
Oh no.
Right. And so
Yeah.
it ends up being a bit of a real problem. So on the team level, I can certainly see how I can plug it in there. I meant to have another one of my little, that's my little symbol for insert psychometric possibility there. Okay, and so then I would say to you that, and maybe we'll do this on the next call, but I want to be able to then say to you, now that I've had this whole discussion, are we also aware that this discussion gave rise to an activity list for a change grid? And I'd like to know, well, how are you going to incorporate knowledge of that individual's preferred psychometric tool into how you're going about doing your background review of what they're doing? And then how are you going to use your knowledge of that as you go about doing a debrief? And then obviously I'd like to know, well, what happens if they don't have any psychometric experience at all going into the change grid? And then how do you end up using the positioning a psychometric tool as part of your follow through the change grid? Are you always going to do it? Is it circumstantial, whatever's going on? So I think this has been a good discussion, and I'd like to continue it and on our next call. Thoughts, comments before we're done for today?
It is beautiful.
Okay, good stuff.
Fascinating.
All right,
Good
good.
stuff.
All right, I am going to do one last thing though. Earlier in this call, we did talk about a document that Brian had sent over to everyone. And just in case there were any latecomers, I'm going to chat it over to everybody again. That is your opportunity to download that article. And that's what we're going to talk about as soon as we're finished with what we're talking about right now. So this would be more about the neurochemistry of what's going on under these Enneagram types. That's our goal, is to explore that. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and end the call for the day.